First Lady test positive to coronavirus, as leaders from around the world send their well wishes to the US president. The man who inspired Hotel Rwanda makes an international appeal for his release from prison, and New Caledonians to vote in their second independence referendum in 2 years. You're watching The World. Hello there, I'm Yvonne Yong. In a week dominated by a chaotic presidential debate, there's been a dramatic new twist in the US election. Earlier today, the US president announced on Twitter that both he and the First Lady tested positive to coronavirus. Ironically, that announcement came just hours after Donald Trump claimed the end of the pandemic was in sight. His physician confirmed the diagnosis and that it was his expectation Mr. Trump could continue to carry out his duties. But the president's age and his increased risk of serious complications from the virus has thrown up very real questions about the nation's leadership in an already chaotic election campaign. Chief Foreign Correspondent Phil Williams begins our coverage.
The verdict is in, and they say that we, all of us, won big last night.
Fresh off what he saw as a victory in the first presidential debate, Donald Trump returned to rousing large crowds at his trademark campaign rallies, which have been criticised for a lack of COVID safety.
Here we go.
Now the US president has confirmed both he and the First Lady have tested positive for coronavirus, adding they'll begin quarantine immediately and will get through this together. Hours earlier, he revealed he and his wife were tested after a senior aide was infected.
She tested positive, and I just went out with a test. I'll see what, because we spent a lot of time, and the First Lady just went out with a test also.
Advisor Hope Hicks reportedly spent a substantial amount of time in close contact with Donald Trump this week, including flying aboard Air Force One and the presidential helicopter Marine One. But it's so far unknown how the President and First Lady contracted COVID. Donald Trump is not the first world leader to be a confirmed case. Both British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Brazilian President Bolsonaro tested positive earlier this year. Both say they've fully recovered, but neither of them were in the heat of an election battle. Early voting is already underway in more than a dozen states. With the election just 33 days away, Donald Trump may have to spend nearly half that time in isolation if he follows his own government guidelines.
Mr. President!
Donald Trump has joined more than 7 million Americans who've tested positive to the virus. At 74 years old, the US president now finds himself in a precarious position. While much is unknown about this virus, what is clear is it hits the elderly hardest. The White House chief physician says he expects the president to continue carrying out his duties without disruption.
If you're 74, just take the age now, 74 gives you a mortality rate, a chance of dying of between 5 and 12%. So he's just on the obese level. Obesity gives you an extra maybe 40% chance of dying.
And I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight, and next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country.
The US president's unbridled enthusiasm may be tempered for now, as his political battle with the virus is now a personal one. Philip Williams, ABC News, Washington.
And our US Bureau Chief David Lipson explains how the president's diagnosis is being received by Americans.
As people start waking up across America, the fact that the Commander-in-Chief and the First Lady have both contracted COVID-19 will come as a major shock. Also, the fact he's been in close and regular contact with the next in command, the Vice President Mike Pence. No suggestion that he has contracted the virus, but the Trump administration and those in the White House don't always take the most stringent protections against COVID-19. There are regular tests at the White House, but, for example, mask wearing isn't always that popular. So there must be significant national security implications and questions swirling around the top levels of government.
Well, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is travelling in Europe, and he says his team is taking extra precautions following the president's positive diagnosis.
We're measuring, trying to make sure we get some additional contact tracing on folks that have been to the White House. We're watching as the White House is doing its work as well. So yeah, we'll certainly be careful, but we've been awful careful for months and months and months, and we're doing our best to keep everybody safe. All my whole team, everybody who's both back in Washington and traveling as well. Nobody with symptoms. Everybody says they're all feeling good, and anybody who says they've got a symptom or something, we'll make sure and take extra special care of them. But we feel like we're in pretty good shape, and the medical team has cleared us to take this next stop here in Croatia, and we'll do that, and then we'll hop back on the plane, and I'll give you a further update then. It'll be morning time in Washington. I'll give you a further update then as well.
And world leaders have sent both private and public messages to the President and First Lady. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi took to Twitter to wish the pair a quick recovery and good health. The UK's Boris Johnson, who also tested positive to the virus in April, hopes they both have a speedy recovery. And the Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin has sent a telegram to Washington. According to local media, Mr. Putin said he's certain Mr. Trump's inherent vitality, good spirits and optimism will help him cope with this dangerous virus. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Jared Monshine, Senior Advisor at Sydney University's US Studies Centre. Now, Jared, regardless of how badly affected Donald Trump is by coronavirus himself, how likely is it that he will alter his stance somewhat on how seriously Americans should be taking COVID-19?
I don't think this is the sort of thing that will cause him to change his stance. He's made very clear that he sees his physical strength as important in terms of his stature. You may remember earlier this year him having an issue with walking down a ramp slowly and him saying that he was trying to be careful. He's very sensitive to his any sense of physical frailty on his part, given his age at 74, and he is very adamant about emphasizing his stamina despite his age. So I don't see him changing his stance on that. If anything, I see him recovering from this, regardless of how serious his symptoms are. He'll want to recover from this and show his strength and say that he defeated it thanks to his vitality and his stamina.
And Jared, will we get any answers on how many others in the White House and on his campaign trail, and even Joe Biden, who he debated with for 90 minutes on Wednesday, may have been exposed to the virus? Yeah,
the Biden campaign has been quiet, but I believe they're testing him. They have not responded to the latest news about President Trump, but they have said that Joe Biden will be tested. Now, in terms of the rest of the Trump team, they have been going down one by one. His national security advisor had a positive COVID-19 test, but was largely asymptomatic. President Trump's valet had one as well. So a number of folks in the White House who operated very closely to the president have been diagnosed with this. And so it's in some ways unsurprising that President Trump has had it as well. But further beyond that, I think the White House is perhaps going to operate with more scrutiny of further issues related to COVID-19.
Especially with the election coming up, is there any possibility that the poll could be postponed due to his illness, given he won't be able to take part in normal campaigning activities in the coming weeks? Even the next presidential debate due in 2 weeks is in question.
That's a great question. So there are two things there. One is the election itself. That is constitutionally mandated. And that has the election date has not moved despite civil war, despite world war. That really does not change. The debate, on the other hand, can really go any way they want. The debates only occur when the two campaigns agree to them. So they could occur on Zoom, they could occur in socially distant class boxes, they could occur in a number of ways. There really is no legal requirement to have them, let alone have them in a specific way.
Well, Donald Trump is 74 years old. What do we know about his health and how much of a risk the virus poses to him? And do we even know if he's suffering symptoms yet?
The White House has not made it clear if he is suffering from any symptoms. They've really only released a note from the physician to the president saying that he will continue to operate in the White House itself. but they have not given more detail than that. It's important to note that this happened pretty late at night in the U.S., and so I imagine in the next 12 hours we will have some more details about his health.
Jared Monshine, thanks so much for joining us tonight on The World.
Thank you.
Well, we've just received confirmation that the US Vice President Mike Pence has tested negative for coronavirus. To other news, and Boris Johnson has been accused of running the UK like a nanny state. The British Prime Minister's own MPs are angry about a 10 p.m. COVID curfew on pubs and restaurants in England, which has led to illegal street parties. But despite the backlash, there are signs the government's containment measures are beginning to work. From London, Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports.
Boris Johnson might have called last drinks at 10 p.m, but these people in Liverpool weren't listening. The government's imposed even tighter restrictions on social gatherings in the city after the curfew backfired, but it's not scrapping it.
The government is simply not listening. It seems to be covering its eyes and ears and singing la 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 la.
Kicking patrons out of pubs and restaurants and into the streets has caused anger in the hospitality industry and on the government's backbench.
When will the Secretary of State start acting like a Conservative and abandon this arbitrary, nanny state, socialist approach?
It's perfectly reasonable to make the argument that we should just let the virus rip. I just think that the hundreds of thousands of deaths that would follow is not a price that anyone should pay.
It's estimated 1 in 200 people in the UK are infected with the coronavirus, but the results of a random testing study suggest the growth rate may be falling. Every month, 150,000 testing kits are sent out to Britons. The latest results suggest the government's containment measures, which include a ban on more than 6 people socialising, are beginning to work.
You can think about an epidemic curve as being a hill, and we've been going up a really steep section of the hill. The little bit of good news in the results we've found today is that maybe it's not quite as steep, but that's really not enough. We need to be going down the hill, and we really need to get to the bottom of the hill like we were in the summer.
The hill is fast becoming a mountain.
Here's a COVID test. Could you please place it in the box?
Another 7,000 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. Nick Dole, ABC News, London.
Russia, France and the United States have joined calls for an immediate ceasefire between Azerbaijan and Armenian forces. But Turkey's Prime Minister says the three powers should have no role in peace talks, and a ceasefire will only be achieved when Armenian forces withdraw from the contested Nagorno-Karabakh region. Armenia's Prime Minister has accused Turkey of advancing on a genocidal path, but the country's foreign ministry says it's ready to re-establish a ceasefire. Nearly 160 people have reportedly been killed and dozens injured in the heaviest fighting since the 1990s. Julian Assange's partner has accused the United States of tearing her family apart. The WikiLeaks founder will spend Christmas in prison while he waits to find out if he'll be extradited to America. He's accused of conspiring to hack US government computers and violating espionage law. As the Australians' hearing came to an end, Stella Morris joined protesters outside the London court to call for his release.
Our children need their father. Julian needs his freedom. And our democracy needs a free press.
The judge will deliver her verdict on the 4th of January. The family of the former hotelier whose life inspired the 2004 film Hotel Rwanda has urged the United States and European Union to appeal for his release from prison. Paul Rusesabagina, who was living in exile in Belgium and the US, says he was tricked into returning to Rwanda, where he was charged with terrorism, murder and other offences last month. The case has gained international attention due to his role in the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where he helped save hundreds of Tutsis. His family and legal team say the 66-year-old has been denied his choice of lawyer and are fearful for his life in prison.
That's why our family is very scared with this behavior of the government today, because this isn't the first time. And when we last saw this, the person ended up dead. So we want my father to stay alive, and we want to have him the regular, real representation that we have chosen to protect him and to defend him as soon as possible.
About 2/3 of New Caledonians will head to the polls this Sunday to decide whether the French territory should be independent. It'll be the second referendum out of a possible 3 on the issue as part of an accord with France. Alexandre Dayon is a research fellow with the Pacific Islands program at the Lowy Institute, and he says Sunday's ballot is likely to go the same way as 2018 when they voted to keep the status quo.
The last vote was in 2018, right? 81% of the population in New Caledonia voted, the population that was allowed to vote. And since then, well, many things happened. You have new electors on the electoral rolls. You